Hello and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host Rob. Today we're going to be looking at the Lunar Sorcerer subclass from, of course, the Krynn book, Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Now technically this can be set in any of the different campaign settings. It's not Krynn specific, even though it's clearly inspired by Krynn. But they have, the fluff section where they talk about like how it fits into all the different worlds or whatever, right? I did want to say really quickly, the Krynn setting always kind of had a special place in my heart. It wasn't my favorite by any means, but it was the first one that really felt separate and distinct from the others. And I think a lot of that was because of the War of the Lance and the fact that you had specific enemies like the Draconians, and they had weird effects on death, like they'd turn into acid and maybe do damage, or they'd petrify and turn to stone, and you might like get your weapons stuck in them and stuff, right? And then combined with like the tie-in books and all that kind of stuff, Krynn felt like a separate and distinct world. Oh, also the magic being based on like different moons being in like ascendant orders and stuff like that, right? It just felt different than say like Greyhawk or anything else. And I started out with like the basic set, with like keeping the Borderlands and stuff like that, and then the expert set with Isle of Dread and everything. But there was really nothing to ever distinguish, keeping the Borderlands from being in a separate world of, say, like Ghost of Saltmarsh or, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. All those things felt like they could just exist in the same campaign world, and, in a lot of cases they did, right? Whereas Dragonlance just felt like something completely different. And partly because the Dragonlance adventures were all like one giant series, right? And I mean, I'm not saying there were never things like this before. We had Against the Giants, and which led into like Evolve to the Drow and all the the Drow series, right? All those, and then Queen of the Demon Web Pits. So it's not like we didn't have big series like that before, or you had like the Against the Slave Lords, like A1 through A4 and all that, right? So we had other series, but like every single adventure that was released in the Dragonlance series tied into the War of the Lance, and it just made Dragonlance feel really different. Part of it might have been too that, I was just getting a little bit older by the time the Dragonlance ones came out, and so I was just more cognizant of the fact that this was its own separate world. And I kind of knew that about the other ones. It just never felt like it mattered, right? We just took everything from every adventure ever, every module, everything we homebrewed and made ourselves. We just threw it into one giant world that was like probably the size of Jupiter or something, and, we never cared, right? But Dragonlance actually felt different, and I remember we actually made new characters for the Dragonlance adventures at one point, and decided to just try to like run them all through essentially, right? And everybody there knew that these were different characters in a different world. They had no connection to our other game world, and that had never really happened with us before. So sorry about the, kind of rambling story here at the beginning. We haven't even gotten into the sorcerer yet. But, just saying, like, I always kind of liked the world of Krynn. It always felt separate and distinct and unique. And that was one thing I really liked about it. So anyways, the Lunar Sorcerer. The Lunar Sorcerer has gotten quite a bit of attention since it came out. I think originally people were just like, holy cow, this is like the greatest sorcerer subclass ever. And people have kind of reined a bit of that back since. But it's still considered to be one of the best sorcerer subclasses, and I would say so too. I don't know if it's better than Clockwork Soul and Aberrant Mind, but I'd probably put it like right behind those two anyways. So definitely a subclass worth playing, and I just think it looks really intriguing. So anyways, at level 1, we're going to get 2 abilities. The first is Lunar Embodiment. Oh, and I should mention that pretty much all of our abilities are going to use this same core mechanic, where we're going to be in different lunar phases that we get to choose. It's not dependent on the actual lunar phase, so that's kind of nice, right? We can pick the one we want, and we're going to get certain spells or abilities that we can use that are tied to that phase. We're going to have our full moon phase, the new moon phase, and the crescent moon phase, and depending on what phase we're in, we can use those abilities, right? And we can even switch between them, and stuff like that, right? So that's going to be the core mechanic that this subclass revolves around. Anyways, so at level 1, you learn additional spells when you reach certain levels of this class as shown on the Lunar Spells table. Each of these spells counts as a sorcerer spell for you, but doesn't count against the number of sorcerer spells you know. And this is really one of the big draws. I think a lot of times people, including me, I'm definitely guilty of this, we sometimes over-exaggerate how bad the sorcerer's like spells no one problem is. Because the truth is, there's other ones like Bard and stuff who, you know, aren't really any better and they fall into that same category. But that being said, it is, you know, it's not like an overwhelming weakness of the class or anything, and you can definitely work around it. We've been doing it since the start of 5e, and people still like sorcerers, right? But getting more spells just added to your spell list does definitely like help the sorcerer quite a bit. So, you know, getting a bunch of extra spells here is something I'm definitely glad of. Anyways, so for full moon phase, at first level you get shield spell. Level 3 we get lesser restoration. At 5 we get dispel magic. At 7 we get death ward, and at 9 we get Rary's telepathic bond. Shield is something I'm going to use for my entire career, so I'm definitely glad about that. Lesser restoration. If nobody else in the party has it, this is a very, very welcome addition. Hopefully I don't need it, and we got like a cleric or a paladin or a druid or somebody who can cast it, in which case I don't really need it. But it's never a bad thing to have, you know. It's just there. It's on my spell list, so if I need it, I have it. Dispel magic, another welcome addition to the spell list, and is very handy. Level 7 Death Ward. Death Ward I quite like. It's definitely one that I could see myself using on a sorcerer quite a bit due to things like Twin Spell or Extend Spell metamagics. I think that metamagics can really change how useful a certain spell becomes. So I think it's pretty nice to have. Rary's telepathic bond. This is one that I would have been very, very happy to have usually, but the problem is that it's a ritual spell, which is why I'd like to have it, right? So I can just cast it for free without using a spell slot. But sorcerers don't have ritual spell casting, which makes this a lot more limited than it otherwise would have been. So not as excited about that one, but still, you know, not a bad spell to have, right? So overall, I think that the full moon spell list is quite solid, especially at the lower levels, right? With shield, lesser restoration, dispel magic, all great. But, you know, all the spells on the list are at least decent. New moon spells. Level 1 we get Ray of Sickness, level 3 we get Blindness Deafness, level 5 we get Vampire Touch, level 7 we get Confusion, and level 9 we get Hold Monster. Again, a pretty decent list, although I'd say this one performs a little better on the high end than the low end. Ray of Sickness is a spell I'm probably not going to cast very often, to be honest. I'm not the biggest fan of Ray of Sickness. But Blindness Deafness is an interesting spell. It's never really like my go-to spell, but because it doesn't require concentration, it does have kind of a niche where I could be concentrating on one spell, but then want to, like, you know, disable another or debuff another target. And, you know, in that case, it's pretty nice to have. It does target Constitution, which is unfortunate, but the scaling is pretty good. And like I said, you know, the fact that I don't have to use concentration on it makes it a pretty handy spell. It's one that I tend to not really cast a lot at higher levels though. But, you know, it's there. It's not bad. Vampire Touch, on the other hand, is one that I'm probably not going to use on a traditional sorcerer. I mean, maybe you could make an argument that if I'm playing like a sorcerer multi-class that uses a lot of like melee abilities, perhaps being able to like twin cast it and hit two guys with it could be handy and heal myself for a bunch of hit points while damaging a couple targets. But overall, it's just one I'm not going to be casting as a sorcerer. Confusion, though, is a good spell. It's one that kind of took a while to grow on me, to be honest. Like back when I first started playing 5th edition, I was like, why would I use Confusion over Fear or Hypnotic Pattern? But as you play more and you start encountering more and more creatures that are either immune to the Fear condition or the Charm condition, then you go, oh, actually, maybe Confusion does kind of have a niche. It's not necessarily my go-to above those two spells, which are only 3rd level as well. So, but, you know, it does have a use where a lot of times I'm like, wait a minute. This looks like some sort of fey creature. I wonder if it's immune to Charm, you know? Maybe we'll go with Confusion instead. Smaller area effect, less reliable ability even when it lands because they could act normally or whatever else, right? But, you know, less immunity restrictions, so it can be still pretty good. And of course, Hold Monster is a great ability, or a great spell, especially on a sorcerer who can hide and cast it, and that makes it even better than normal. Finally, we have the Crescent Moon spell. Color Spray at level 1, Alter Self at level 3, at level 5 we're getting Phantom Steed, at level 7 we get hallucinatory, there we go, Terrain, and at level 9, Mislead. So, Color Spray, I was about to say it's not a bad spell, but who am I kidding? It actually is a pretty bad spell. It's very similar to Sleep, but just worse in every possible way. So, you know, not good when Sleep is also on your spell list, and it's just a better alternative. And neither one of the spells I'm going to be casting at higher levels, right? But, you know, if I'm level 1, I'd way rather have Sleep. Anyways, Alter Self, pretty handy, actually. Not a bad spell. Phantom Steed is usually a great spell, but again, we don't have ritual spell casting, which is why I would have wanted Phantom Steed. Still decent for out of combat, I guess. If I just want a steed that can carry me long distances quickly, then I don't care that it only has 1 hit point and dies in a stiff breeze. But if I'm going to be trying to use it in combat, that's where I want it to be a ritual, where I can just keep casting it after every combat. Oh well. Great spell, but in this case, wrong class. Well, maybe not wrong class, but less useful than some other choices. Anyways, Hallucinatory, Terrain, and Mislead. Neither one of these are spells I find extremely exciting. I would probably just rather have, like, you know, Death Ward, Confusion, or Hold Monster, right? So the alternatives just seem to be stronger. The Crescent Moon spell list, in my opinion, is definitely the weakest. I think the Full Moon spell list is the strongest, but the New Moon's not too far behind, and then we got our Crescent Moon is quite a bit below. Anyways, whenever you finish a long rest, you can choose what lunar phase manifests its power through your magic, Full Moon, New Moon, or Crescent Moon. While in the chosen phase, you can cast 1 first-level spell of the associated phase in the lunar spells table once without expending a spell slot. Once you cast a spell in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. This is yet another reason to take Full Moon, to be honest, because since it's only first-level spells that applies to, and I'm probably going to be casting Shield a lot as opposed to Color Spray or Ray of Sickness, I might as well get a free Shield spell. If it applied to any of them, to any of the spells on the list, then things like Rary's Telepathic Bond or Phantom Steed might have actually, you know, been enough to pull me to some, well, I mean, Rary's Telepathic Bond is still in the same spell list as Shield, but you know what I'm saying. It might be enough to pull you in some of these other directions, but since that only applies to the first level spells, you know, Full Moon wins again. Anyways, that was only our first level 1 ability. We have another one called Moonfire. So you can call down the radiant light of the moon on your command. You learn the Sacred Flame spell, which, you know, normally we wouldn't have access to, right? Which doesn't count against the number of sorcerer cantrips you know. When you cast a spell, you can target 1 creature as normal, or target 2 creatures within range that are within 5 feet of each other. So this has drawn a lot of obvious comparisons to the Death Domain Cleric, which gets a very similar ability, I think it's called a Reaper, with their cantrips. The difference, though, is that ours is limited specifically to Sacred Flame, whereas the Death Domain Cleric gets to use that with any cantrip from the Necromancy school. And frankly, Toll the Dead is usually just a better spell than Sacred Flame. Now, it does have more resistances, so there is that. But I don't think this is a bad ability still, right? I'm getting an extra cantrip. That's okay, you know, nothing wrong with that. Radiant damage is very, very rarely resisted or immune. So, again, not bad. And, you know, hitting 2 targets with it is definitely better than 1, right? So, I don't think that this ability overall is as good as what the Death Domain Cleric gets. But it's definitely not a bad ability either. So, it's one I'm fairly happy with. And then combined with our Lunar Embodiment, where we get all the extra spells depending on our moon phase, there's a lot here at level 1 to really draw you in. Anyways, moving on to level 6, Lunar Boons. The current phase of your Lunar Embodiment can affect your meta magic feature. Each Lunar Embodiment phase is associated with certain schools of magic as shown here. Full Moon, Abjuration and Divination. New Moon, Evocation and Necromancy. And Crescent Moon is divination, and transmutation. It's really unfortunate that Crescent Moon and Full Moon both get divination. I don't know why they repeated it. It would have been nice to get, a different school of magic there. Because then at least that might have drawn you to Crescent Moon. But, what do you do? So anyways, whenever you use meta magic on a spell of the school of magic associated with your current lunar embodiment phase, you can reduce the sorcery points by 1 to a minimum of 0. You can reduce the sorcery points spent for your meta magic a number of times equal to proficiency bonus, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. This is pretty nice. They're not limited to the spells on the spell list, which is also kind of nice. They just apply to, the different schools of magic. I don't think it's necessarily huge because, like I said, it is still somewhat limited, and you kind of have to be, playing within those schools of magic in order to really get the benefit of it. But the fact is, even if it saves me a couple sorcery points in an adventuring day, that's still a couple sorcery points, right? Like, sorcery points are a valuable commodity. So even if I just save 1 or 2, it's not a bad ability by any means. Especially if I chose that lunar phase for the spells I was getting, and then I get to apply it to 1 or 2 other things throughout the day. To me, that's just an added bonus. So I don't think it's a bad ability. I don't think it's spectacular, but it's, it's a 7 out of 10. Let's call it that. We also get Waxing and Waning at level 6. Unfortunately, this is the first ability that I would actually consider to be kind of weak. It's still not awful, but it's not really great. So anyways, you gain greater control over the phases of your lunar magic. As a bonus action, you can spend 1 sorcery point to change your current lunar embodiment phase to a different one. You can now cast 1 first level spell from each lunar phase of the lunar spells table once without expending a spell slot, provided your current spell phase is the same as the lunar phase. Once you cast a lunar phase spell in this way, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. So let's go over that. It's a little confusing. Basically, as a bonus action, you can spend a sorcery point to change from your current lunar phase to a new one, and then you can cast 1 first level spell from each lunar phase of the lunar spells table once without expending a spell slot, if it's in the same as a new lunar phase. So let's say you were in like new moon and you wanted to change to full moon, so you could cast shield. You'd have to spend a sorcery point to change, and you could then cast shield once for free. You could have just been in that phase and cast shield once for free and not use a sorcery point. I don't see myself changing to new moon for Ray of Sickness or crescent moon for color spray. Overall, not great in my opinion. There might be times where, maybe I was in like, say, new moon and I just wanted to change anyways. So I spent a sorcery point and then it's like, oh yeah, now I could use shield once. If I was going to be changing for some other reason, maybe, but overall it's not particularly strong in my opinion. So then, like all good sorcerers, we go from level 6 all the way to 14 before we get our next ability. It's a bit of a marathon there. But anyways, the power of the it's called Lunar Embodiment. The power of the lunar phase saturates your being while you're in a lunar embodiment phase. Which of course you're always being one of the 3. But anyways, you'll gain the following benefits associated with that phase. Full moon. You can use a bonus action to shed bright light in a 10-foot radius and dim light for an additional 10 feet, or to douse the light. In addition, you and creatures of your choice have advantage on intelligence, investigation, or wisdom perception checks while within the bright light you shed. This isn't bad. Not shedding light is particularly powerful in D&D, but if I want to make those type of rolls where I'm like, there's something important here, I think, maybe we're going to investigate for whatever reason, being able to be like, hey, I'll use this ability, and then, it can trigger when I need it. It applies not just to me, but creatures of my choice, so my entire party could be benefiting from this. That's pretty decent. New Moon, you have advantage on dexterity stealth checks. In addition, while you're entirely in darkness, attack rolls have a disadvantage against you. This is one that's pretty decent too. Now, the disadvantage against me in complete darkness, a lot of creatures would have had that anyways, but I guess if they have dark vision, then they would have been able to ignore the fact that I'm in complete darkness. But now they can't, right? It has no bearing on dark vision or devil sight or anything else, right? If I'm in complete darkness, they have disadvantage. There are circumstances where that can be pretty good. Even though overall I don't think it's great. But advantage on stealth checks, again, this is something where I know I'm going to be in this situation, and I can be like, hey, we're all going to have to make stealth rolls. It's going to be bad if we fail. Let me give us all advantage on those checks. So, this is a case where now I might want to spend that sorcery point to change lunar phases now that I'm level 14 and I can get these benefits instead of in addition to level 6 benefits. I was going to say instead of, but it's not instead of. You know what I mean. Anyways, Crescent Moon. You have resistance to necrotic and radiant damage. Now, perhaps you're an Aasimar, in which case you already had that, or Aasimar, however it's pronounced. But most likely you aren't, in which case you didn't have this, and that's actually not too bad. It's also one where I could justify maybe spending the sorcery point if it turns out like, oh, we're fighting like a bunch of angels or something. Hadn't expected that at the start of my adventuring day. Let's change and give myself resistance to it, right? Or even undead, but undead are a lot more common. Like I said, suddenly it turns out we're fighting some angels. I'm like, ooh, things I did not expect to be doing when I woke up this morning. Anyways, finally at level 18, we have Lunar Phenomenon. As a bonus action, you can tap into a special power of your current lunar embodiment phase. Alternatively, as part of the bonus action you take to change your lunar phase during the waxing and waning feature, you can immediately use the power of the lunar phase you are entering. Full Moon. You radiate moonlight for a moment. Each creature of your choice within 30 feet of you must succeed on a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC or be blinded until the end of its next turn. In addition, one creature of your choice in that area regains 3d8 hit points. So you can heal one of your buddies or yourself and blind a bunch of stuff. It's not bad. It's each creature of your choice for the blinding, right? So there's no friendly fire or anything. I don't think the blind condition is the strongest ability by level 18. But, the fact that it's a nice debuff that can hit tons of enemies, no friendly fire, and throw out a bit of a healing, it's not the worst ability out there. New Moon. You momentarily emanate gloom. Each creature of your choice within 30 feet of you must succeed on a dexterity saving throw against your spell save DC, or take 3d10 necrotic damage and have its speed reduced to 0 until the end of its next turn. This is already sounding pretty promising. In addition, you become invisible until the end of your next turn, or until immediately after you take an attack roll or cast a spell. I like this one even more. Now, necrotic is a little more common if I'm fighting undead. This is probably not what I'm going to use because I might be worried about resistances or immunities. But assuming I'm not fighting undead, 3d10 damage, wide range of effect again, no friendly fire, and I get to turn invisible afterwards. That's not too bad. Now the damage isn't huge at level 18 again. Technically the blind condition might actually be more useful depending on the fight, right? Just giving them all disadvantage. But, it does do a decent chunk of damage, and especially if I, maybe I'm quick and casting something else or casting something else. I guess this one's actually, this is a bonus action, so no need to quick and cast anything. But let's say I'm throwing down an area of effect spell, and then I do this on top of it. That's going to be a decent source of damage. I'm turning invisible after, so I don't have to worry about, getting mowed down by the enemy. I mean, I might if they can see invisible, but you know what I'm saying. Overall, though, not too bad. I think both of these abilities are pretty solid so far. Crescent Moon. You can magically teleport to an unoccupied space you can see within 60 feet of yourself. You can bring along one willing creature you can see within 5 feet of yourself. That creature teleports to an unoccupied space of your choice that you can see within 5 feet of your destination space. In addition, you and that creature gain resistance to all damage until the start of your next turn. This isn't bad by any means either. It's actually a really solid ability. You and them both get resistance to all damage types. 60-foot range on a teleport is pretty good. Being able to take an ally with you is also pretty good. My only real complaint is that I have to be able to see the area, so I can't use this to, like, you know, teleport like through walls and stuff and try to like cheese through some different types of traps that maybe I might be worried about. You know, but overall, still pretty solid ability. Anyways, once you use one of these bonus action benefits, you can't use that benefit again until you finish a long rest, unless you spend 5 sorcery points to use it again. Now, I already mentioned earlier, sorcery points are a pretty valuable commodity. I don't know that any of these abilities is so good that I'm going to give up 5 sorcery points to use it a second time. But, you know, having the option is better than not having the option. Maybe I'm like, oh, that was an amazing ability last fight. Maybe I would actually, you know, choose to blind everything that I, you know, can see practically. You know, there are times where maybe it would be worth it. I'm just saying that overall, personally, 5 sorcery points is a lot. You can get a lot of mileage out of 5 sorcery points, you know? So, whatever. But like I said, I'd rather have the option of being able to give up this 5 sorcery points and not use that option than just not have the option at all, right? So, you know, whatever. Maybe 3 or 4 might have been a little more tempting, but whatever. Either way, though, that is the Lunar Sorcerer. I actually think that it's pretty good. Even the one ability, the Waxing and Waning ability, which I think is personally pretty weak, I think that it does get better once we have those level 14 and 18 abilities where we're like, oh, maybe I will actually change phase now. You know, changing at level 6 just so I can cast a first level spell for free, not great. But this is why I don't think the ability is absolutely, you know, it's not like a 0 or a 1 out of 10 either. Because even though it's really bad at level 6, if the campaign goes high enough, I might be like, hey, you know what? I actually will use that ability now because I want this other effect with it. And I don't want to have to wait and change out on a long rest, you know? So, also you have a lot more sorcery points at higher levels, right? Giving up 1 of your sorcery points when you're only level 6 is quite a bit. Giving up 1 when you're like level 18 or 20, not such a sacrifice anymore, you know? So, I think that all the abilities are, you know, at least decent if you're looking at the whole lifespan of the character, right? And some of them are pretty amazing, honestly. So I actually think it's one of the strongest sorcerer subclasses we've gotten so far. And but I do think that it's maybe slightly behind Aberrant Mind and Clockwork Soul still, just because I don't get to like trade out all the spells and then choose new ones that I might want, right? So I think this is actually a really well-designed subclass. It's not like escalating this power creep through the roof, but it's also not, you know, a subclass where you're like, why would I ever play this when we have so many better alternatives? It's actually a really, really solid contender. And I don't think it's too far behind the other two. I keep saying that Sorcerer and Clockwork Sorcerer and Aberrant Mind are better, but you know, it's by that much kind of thing, right? It's definitely, you know, it's not like Wild Magic or something like that where it's, you know, quite a bit down. I think it's like right there with the other two. And I think it's a cool theme. I really like this idea of my magic being tied to like different lunar phases and stuff like that, right? And it's just a cool concept. You know, it can be a moon sorcerer. Why not? Anyways, those are my thoughts on the class. Feel free to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and most importantly, leave me your comments in the comment section. I definitely think, I haven't played a pure caster in a while now, so if I get a chance to actually play this campaign instead of DMing it, which is what is probably going to happen, let's be realistic here, but if I get a chance to play it, then I think Lunar Sorcerer might be the class I choose. So that, or maybe going Paladin and playing some sort of Knight of Solamnia, that could be kind of cool as well. But I've played plenty of Paladins. It's been a long time since I played like a pure caster, and maybe I'll just go straight Sorcerer, or maybe, who am I kidding? I'd probably still take 2 levels of Warlock in there somewhere. But anyways, whatever, not really the point. Point is, leave me your comments in the comment section. I'd love to hear other people who've played the subclass or who are interested in playing the subclass, you know, or what their experience has been with it. Because like I said, I haven't had a chance to play it yet. So it's all just theory crafting and guesswork at this point. But, you know, you can usually evaluate these things and look at this and go, ooh, getting shield for free is nice. Casting shield once a day for free is pretty nice, you know? Is it going to completely redefine Dungeons and Dragons as we know it? No, but it's definitely not bad. Oh, and I get these other spells I can choose from as well. Or not even choose, I just get for free, sorry. You know, good stuff, good stuff. So anyways, that's everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.